What is up, everybody? Thanks for joining me. Um, I've been thinking a lot about lately about the country, with the news, and even though I don't pay attention to the news as much as I used to, just for sanity's sake, you can't help but you notice some stories and things going on. The idea that came to me was this concept of politics being downstream from culture. And although this is true, I do think I understand what this is saying. And it's saying something to the akin of the idea that just the nature of politicians, right? They'll do whatever they need to pretend whatever whoever they need to be to pretend to be, to appease or appear to be what you need them to be. So whatever the culture's desiring, they're going to be that. That's what this means, right? Kind of like vultures, vultures will go where the carcasses are. They'll find the carcasses, and they will find them and go there. And that's what politicians do in regards to our culture. Um, Another way to think about this, though, is the idea that we get what we deserve. At least that's the implication, right? As a culture, you get the politicians that you deserve. So we get Biden, right? At one point, we deserved Trump. I'm not saying that's good or bad. There certainly bad came along with it, and now we deserve Biden. Um, and the reason why I think that's definitely true is the fact that no matter even though some of you, including me, look at this historic election side-eyed, for lack of a better, let's just say that's a diplomatic way to say it. No matter how many humans actually voted um, for Biden, it's definitely true that a lot of people did. And so we get what we deserve. In voting for Biden, what we basically voted for was globalism, and what we voted against was nationalism. And so, where are we now? What's kind of like the biggest story? I can't help but think that a lot of the people that voted for Biden also have Ukraine flags in their bios and things on social media. Um, Biden is a globalist. And so now we're spending taxpayer dollars that we don't even have. We're mortgaging our future and paying, at least taking a lot of that money and giving it to a foreign country. And what we look to be investing in is World War III. Now, I think it goes without saying that that doesn't sound like a good investment. I don't think that's too far out on the limb to say that. To spend and mortgage your future, your children's future, to pay for World War III, not sounding like the best idea in the world. And so this is where we are. And back to this idea of we get what we deserve, and politics is downstream from culture, right? And I think that that's definitely true, like I just explained. But there's something that I think that we need to also explore, which is the idea of how do we get our culture. Um, because I think what happens is it's cyclical, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So instead of just flowing one direction, there's pressure and forces that move the culture to where it wants it to go. Just, I would say 10 years ago, the concept of an influencer, um, I don't even know that we heard the term very often. If you did, it was very specific in regards to something, somebody doing something specific. But now, an influencer is almost like a career. If you think about it, you can think of you just even saying the word, you probably have an image of somebody or multiple people in your mind that you think fit the bill of an influencer. And what do they influence? They influence the culture. Um, Now, there's a grassroots aspect to this, a very, uh, animalistic, people. By that, I don't mean necessarily negative, but, just dealing with appetites, whether it be like somebody's funny, somebody's attractive, they act well, they're smart, they're rich, whatever it is that causes them to come to prominence. There is that aspect of it. But there's also this nefarious side of things, right? Where there seems to be people that are sort of pushed. Have you noticed this? Like, you don't tend to get, um, you see this happening. Um, you get people who, as an example, let's just, real quick aside. There are people that I've been around, or that sing amazing, and yet some of the best performers, and by best I mean, let me take that back. Actually, not the best performers, but some of the most prominent performers, they're not really the best singers, are they? There's ability involved for sure, but not it's not always those who have the best ability that are pushed into prominent positions. Like, what is it that causes, what is this additional force that is causing some people to be, um, pushed into prominence, and others never seem to get that break, right? I think there are people in control, and I don't mean this even conspiratorially. I mean, I think this is just a fact. Um, there's always decision makers at the top of corporations, right? When it becomes conspiratorial is when you begin to see patterns where it seems to push, um, only one direction. That's when it becomes something of note, right? You think about it in terms of us being sheep. These influencers are the sheepdog. They're the sheepdogs, right? They are there to herd us, to get us all heading the same direction and keep us together and keep us in lockstep. Is it really a far stretch to say that the farmer, whoever he or they are, choose the sheepdogs? And maybe they come out naturally, but some of the sheepdogs don't quite fit what the farmer's looking for, and others do, because they adhere to the program. No, I want the sheep to go this way and not that way. I mean, I think that's fair to say that. I think anyone who pays attention to what's going on sees that there's definitely a momentum, a direction, a trajectory, established. Like, the people in charge, what are their goals? What's their criteria, right? Um, I don't know. I mean, and this is where it becomes conspiratorial to the nth degree, trying to figure out what the motivation of people are. Like, why do it this way when that doesn't seem the best way, but in any stretch, right? It just seems like the people end up going the wrong direction. The culture goes the wrong way. Um, so I think what happens too is we end up seeing glimpses of this force that pushes against the natural aspect. So, like, if you think about someone like Kanye West as an example, who's in the news recently, it appears that he was a good sheepdog and now he is no longer useful. You notice that? So he has all this power. The sheep are used to listening to his voice and being herded certain directions by him. He's one of the influencers. but he strayed, right? And it isn't enough to go sheep, sheepdog, and this is the relationship. It's now this additional force comes to light because now you see the machinations of the system sort of come against these influencers. Recently, you got people, other influencers, basically telling Kanye he's gotten out of his lane, right? You hear that a lot. Kanye's gotten out of his lane. Well, who chooses the lanes? Who's the one that chooses the lanes for everybody, right? I thought we were free. Guess not. Even the influencers aren't free, it appears. And like, so here's a this guy's got like $1 billion corporation, I think, and JP Morgan Chase has decided to debank him for the all what is it White Lives Matter shirt that he wore with Candace Owens. So it's interesting, right? If you said Black Lives Matter, you would be promoted probably. So you see that dynamic at play, right? If you do the opposite of what this force wants, then that force comes against you. Whereas you were going with the tide, now you're swimming against the tide. And this is some of the stuff that we see. And the nature of this, like who's in charge, and what, like I said, what are their motives, and you see like the nefarious nature of this, right? So um, the one of the things that's in prominence now is this concept, or not, the story that PayPal, right? They lost a ton of money now because billions of dollars or something. I don't remember how much, but um, because somehow it came out that in their terms of service, they reserve the right for themselves to steal $2,500 of your money if they somehow discovered in your social media or your private life. How they would discover this is an interesting angle or aspect to this story. If they discovered you were, I guess, hateful or harmful verbally or libely, I guess, or if you wrote, I mean, I don't know how that exactly, again, it's vague though. So they reserve the right, and we know how this works, right? Because we've experienced this with these social media companies where they have their terms of service, and it's so arbitrary, even in regards to how it's written, but it's very arbitrary in how and when they choose to employ it. There seems to be people who get away with it endlessly, but they seem to be pushing one direction, and that's fine with them. But if you push the other direction and you don't even do it near as bad as those people did, they come down on you. And you see this force that is at work in our society. And, as a biblical person, I'm thinking, demonic, satanic. But you don't even have to you don't have to be a biblical person to see this, though. You can say it's human nature, the power of greed, or the people on top wanting to keep control. And they think that that's the best way to do it, and they collude with each other. It doesn't have to go spiritual. But you see this, right? And so there's this idea of disinformation. Alex Jones is another one. He in a court case was he's supposed to pay Sandy Hook victims almost like $1 billion. For what? For what? You think about this, it's like he didn't pull the trigger. He didn't do anything. but talk about it. And people didn't like the way he talked about it. Now, I don't know. I don't watch Alex Jones. I don't know what his opinion was. I know what people say his opinion were was that he said it never happened. And I know there were people that said that this never happened. So I guess he talked about it in that way. But if you think about it, who chooses when disinformation is harmful? Because the same media pushed Russiagate. That didn't happen, right? Because you know it didn't happen. Like if you look into it, you can see it. I've talked about this on my channel at least a couple times, I believe. It was apparent it never happened. Or at least, that was the way it appeared, right? And of course, it wasn't this grand. There wasn't information that came out. There was nobody keeping this secret information that the media knew, but that he just weren't revealing to you. The stuff you saw was what you saw, which was it was a blatant partisan attempt to take down Trump and go after him, and that's all it was. Meanwhile, Biden is literally on tape saying to people, I don't know who he was even talking about how he basically said, I blackmailed the Ukraine to force them to not go after or investigate an oil corporation, which I thought the Democrats hated oil, right? I guess if it's their oil corporations, it's fine. That Biden's son was a part of. Oh, don't you dare investigate my son's corporation or the corporation that's paying my son. The same media that dreamed up a controversy about Trump for Russiagate ignored it. This is the same media that went through Sarah Palin's garbage. Meanwhile, John Edwards has a cancer-stricken wife who he's cheating on, and his love child with his mistress he's using campaign donations to pay for. The media somehow missed that. So disinformation, bad information, who is the ones that says what is good for the culture? Like, who is socially engineering our culture? Because you see it happening, right? I mean, I'm going to take a chance and talk about this, but because my particular channel has been hit a couple times by their tube for, what did they say? It was disinformation about health, in regards to the COVID crisis scamdemic that we dealt with. And there's no question that there was aspects of it that were completely fraudulent. Completely fraudulent. Politicians were the ones that were all of a sudden doctors. And I've mentioned this before. In a time where people when they talk about financial stuff, they're more, I'm not giving financial advice though. How many people were giving medical advice? How many people felt empowered to give medical advice? They literally said a product could stop it, and everybody was mandating you had to get that product. And then, no, not only does it not stop it, it barely helps, and there might be a gajillion side effects. They shut down society. They kept people who were dying from seeing their loved ones one last time. For a lie. Who's being sued for that? Alex Jones is getting sued for, let's say he's wrong and okay. He didn't shut down society. How come only certain people get hit with the hammer of justice? This hammers our society. It shapes our society. You see that? And the whole thing too is like the cake baker. The The guy who didn't want to ice a cake to celebrate a gay wedding because he didn't believe in it. He's not even allowed to do that. He's been sued he's being sued again. This is just an average guy trying to run a business. Notice how the people who taught tolerance and diversity refuse to tolerate your diverse ideas. It's crazy. This is what shapes our society. And, you know, I don't know how much more I've got necessarily to add to this per se, but I think it just deserves to be said, right? We are being manipulated. Who's doing it and why? There's certain people, certain segments of the population you can't even talk about, right? You can't mention certain people, but whereas other people are fair game, you can say the white male is the abuser of all of society, of all the other demographics, slandering every single person who falls under that demographic. But you can't say, as an example, a certain group of people tend to own Hollywood. And I think you know who I'm talking about, even when I say it. And I'm not speaking negatively about any specific groups. I'm just saying you could say the majority of violent crimes are done by black males. You could say that, and nobody seems to have a problem with that. But you can't say certain things. You notice that? And we got to get to a point where we can say things. And as long as we're in a society where there's some force that manipulates and chooses what we can see and how much we can see, who gets elevated and who gets canceled. As long as we're in that, that's a fake culture. And that even when you have historic elections, when that culture goes to the polls to choose its destiny, and how much of a stretch is it even to say that if you have a force that's manipulating the culture itself, that it won't go and manipulate other areas of society too, like elections? Just something to think about.